In clinical nutrition, we have a strange pattern. We tell people with depression they need more B12, better iron status, higher zinc availability, or improved mitochondrial energy in the brain cells, and that we need to support their neurotransmitter synthesis. But then we never follow through on the question, where do these nutrients actually come from together in the diet? We talk about them individually, in isolation, almost from a strictly academic mindset. But we don't connect them to the food that delivers all of them in their most usable form, properly raised red meats. So in this video, we're going to correct that oversight, because when you look at how these nutrients work together, the depression red meat story flips completely. Let's start with what matters most, the facts and the fix. So if you only stay for a minute, you're going to leave with value. No doubt that you've heard the individual pieces of this story over and over again. Go ahead and check your B12 levels and see if those are low. Watch your iron, see if you have an anemia. Support your zinc levels. Improve your mitochondrial energy, and while you're at it, go ahead and get enough creatine in your diet. And why not boost your omega-3s and balance your carnitine levels? Videos everywhere mention these. You're going to read about them online if you start digging into depression and red meat. And your practitioner probably even tests these. Sort of. More on that coming up. But here's the problem. They're almost always discussed in isolation, as if each one of these nutrients stands alone instead of part of a bigger story and part of a complete system that your brain depends upon. And almost no one talks about the fact that all of these nutrients are naturally occurring and come in a complete package together in red meat. So today we're going to connect the dots here and not look at these in isolation, but look at these in the context of working together. Because red meat, it's not just going to help lower inflammation and stabilize blood sugar like we talked about in part 1 of our red meat and depression. It delivers the exact collection of brain-specific nutrients that most people with depression are missing. And we're not going to be looking at these in theoretical dosages or in some supplemental form, but in the form that your body evolved to be able to use. That's the fix. Now, if you like where we're heading so far, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button and drop me a comment down below and let me know if any of these nutrients that I've mentioned have ever shown up low on some of your lab tests or made you wonder why no one told you about them in the first place. And if you're new here, this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. I'm a clinician and I'm a rancher. And I see both sides, the physiology and the food. And that gives me the insight to help you make real changes in your health. Now, when you understand how nutrient-dense animal foods actually interact with your biology, this picture becomes painfully obvious that red meat, it was never the problem when it came to depression. And for many struggling, it's actually the missing part of your foundation. Let's start putting the pieces of this story together, and why not start with B12? We'll just consider it the first domino in optimizing your brain chemistry. The problem is that your brain needs B12 to make neurotransmitters. You can think about these as the neurochemicals, the signaling molecules that optimal brain function depends upon. When you have good B12 levels, that's going to support a process known as methylation, and that's what keeps your nerves firing. It's what helps keep your energy levels stable. And it's also that B12 is also going to support your red blood cells. It's going to actually allow them to mature to the level that they should. And when you have low B12 and red blood cells don't mature, that leads to an anemia, which means that you're not supplying the oxygen and nutrients to the brain that you need to. It's interesting also that even just having low B12 alone can look exactly like depression. And the reason that that is the case is because you need B12 for what's known as nerve myelination. Myelination simply means that it's the insulation, if you will. Just to give you a visual way to think about this, it's the insulation around your nerves that allows them to be more efficient. When the nerves are forming, you want good myelin forming around that nerve. When you have an injury to a nerve and you're looking to try to repair it, you need to be able to support good myelin production. B12 is one of the underlying key factors in that happening. And when your B12 levels drop, everything behind that is going to begin to slow down as well as far as neurological function. You'll see that your mood certainly will decline. Remember, I said it can mimic depression by itself. You'll see that your focus begins to fall off, motivation declines, your energy levels are not as optimal as they should be. And again, that can be tied to the anemia. And when you're consuming either, for example, like a low meat diet or a plant-based diet, or you're just leaning into a diet that's heavily fortified, that doesn't equate to getting optimal sources of B12 in your diet. And remember in the intro, I said, hey, I'm going to come back to this lab test conversation because I think that's important for you to know about as well. Well, that story is probably no more relevant when you start talking about B12. And what I'll share with you on this is pretty straightforward. Don't trust blood tests when it comes to looking at your B12 levels because they're not accurate. And I'm talking about your standard serum B12 levels. They just don't represent your true B12 status. In fact, I'll share with you here just a quote, if you will, which is that numerous studies have established that serum B12 has limited diagnostic value as a standalone marker. And that's pretty straightforward. Low serum levels of B12 don't always represent deficiency, and likewise, severe functional deficiency of the micronutrient has been documented in the presence of normal or even high levels of serum B12. There's better testing options out there because what good is a test that if you look at it and it shows normal on the test, but it doesn't translate to the level of B12 in the body? That's just not useful in any way clinically or to help you improve and move away from your depressive state. We have to think bigger here. So I'm just going to start creating a story here, which is that B12 is the spark. That should be the spark that we look for. But keep in mind, guys, a spark doesn't really do a whole lot if it doesn't have some fuel to help it take off. And this is where we start to lean into our next nutrient, which is iron. And I'm going to be specific on the iron we're talking about here and label that as heme iron. That's animal-derived or animal protein-derived iron sources on this. And we can think about this as the oxygen that lets the B12 do the work that it's supposed to do. Some of the things that iron does in the context of brain health is that it's going to deliver oxygen so your B12 or so that your brain can actually use the B12. They all work together. They're all helping with optimal red blood cell function. They support myelin synthesis. Remember, that's the insulation that we were talking about there. But it's even more than that because iron is also a cofactor in a lot of enzymes that are linked to serotonin production, dopamine function. So if you're looking at trying to optimize your social interaction, your desire to want to be around other people and to socially engage, or your motivation, your just general energy throughout the day. Low iron, because of its impact on neurotransmitters, not just because of what it's doing for red blood cells, but because of how it's impacting those neurotransmitters, it can optimize all of these things that I've shared with you there. And when you think about the energy production, remember, the reason that we want to get the oxygen to the tissues in the body is because ultimately that helps us produce our energy molecule, ATP. And when you look at the amount of energy that is used by the brain, roughly 20% at a minimum of the energy that we produce in the body every day is used by the brain. Now, I've even seen data that shows all the way up to 33% of that, so a third of our total energy production. But at a minimum, 20%, so a fifth of our total energy production is getting redirected or getting prioritized to the brain to keep it optimal. So when you think about things like fatigue often gets misdiagnosed as depression. We just need to optimize the ability for the cells in the brain to optimally produce energy. You may think in that same context, something like brain fog gets labeled as a mood disorder. And this also goes back to looking at the forms of iron. Heme iron versus a non-heme iron. Heme sources of iron, the punchline here is that the origin of the iron matters. So heme sources of iron are going to have a greater impact. than your non-heme sources. So this is why animal-derived sources of iron are more important. But iron and B12, even though those are the two nutrients that we've leaned on so far, those aren't enough. There's more to this story. Your brain also needs minerals, other minerals, to be able to run some of these mood pathways, if you will. And that leads us up to zinc. Zinc is going to be a mineral that we can think about as activating your mood pathways. Zinc is going to help regulate your serotonin. Again, that socialization chemical, the chemical in the brain that helps you enjoy the things that you're engaging in. But not only does it support these neurotransmitters, it's also going to enhance some of the growth factors in the brain. So let me break each one of those down in more detail. Zinc is going to modulate your serotonin receptors. What that means is that not only do you need enough of the neurochemical that you're trying to produce, but that neurochemical also has to be received effectively at the cell level. That's the whole communication process. It's almost like someone has to speak and someone has to listen to have a conversation. When you don't have adequate zinc, your cells don't listen to even an optimal amount of serotonin. Zinc corrects that. So you take a broken signal and you turn it into an optimal signal. Now, what about supporting the growth factors? Well, there's one growth factor that gets a lot of attention, and deservedly so. It's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And this particular compound is going to enhance the plasticity, the ability of the brain to be adaptable. If the brain tissue or neurological tissue gets damaged, it's going to give it the ability to repair. And something to note on this is that when it comes to zinc, zinc deficiencies are not that uncommon. In fact, they're actually pretty common. And this can not only happen because of low meat diets, that's certainly a driving factor, but if you have chronic inflammation, that's going to be another cause of low zinc. And if you're curious, do I have low zinc? One of the things that you can immediately look at is look at your fingernails. If your fingernails have white spots on them, that's called leukonychia. And leukonychia is an indication of zinc deficiency. Now, just to be fair, if you're matching up with some of the things that I'm saying here, but you don't have leukonychia, it doesn't mean you're in the all clear, but if you do have those white spots, you need to be more concerned about your zinc status. When you have low zinc, you're going to be less resilient, more inflamed. You're going to feel mentally flat because of some of these mechanisms that I've shared with you. And then if you look at adding B12 and iron back to this conversation, they can't do their jobs efficiently when you have a zinc deficient brain. So now that your system has the B12, which we'll again label as the spark, we've got the iron, we think about that as getting the oxygen there, part of the fuel. Now you've got the activation of all of this coming together and getting kicked into motion. That's zinc. But you still need energy to make this all flow efficiently. This is where creatine comes into the conversation. Creatine can be viewed as the brain's energy buffer. Just to restate this fact and to illustrate how important energy production is to brain function, your brain burns 20% of your total energy production. Remember, I said I've seen sources that suggest all the way up to 33% of that. Creatine is like you're giving your batteries a constant charge, if you will, right? You've all seen the little scales on a battery. You mash it and you want all the lights to light up so that you know the battery's fully charged. Well, what if your battery is only clicking on one light in that entire panel? That battery's not charged. Creatine is what's going to bring it back to a full lit up panel to let you know you're fully charged. Low creatine is going to translate into mental fatigue. Your general thought process tends to be slower. And right along with that, you'll find that individuals in this scenario tend to get overwhelmed very easily. Like emotionally, they get overwhelmed and they can't seem to put a finger on, why do I keep getting so overwhelmed? Part of that could be the fact that your brain just doesn't have enough energy to optimize on a day-to-day basis. And this is also why people on low meat diets, they feel drained both physically and mentally. There's so many reasons here, but this is just one easy one to point to, is that you just don't have optimal creatine to act as an energy buffer to help fill in these gaps in energy when you need another resource to reach into. So again, back into the bigger picture here, creatine is what's going to allow for our fuel delivery. It's what's bringing the fuel to the fire to let it burn efficiently. Now, not to be confused with creatine, let's move on over to carnitine. And this is how your brain turns fats into fuel. Carnitine is going to be extremely efficient at shuttling fats, specifically what are called fatty acids, the smaller segments of the bigger fat molecules. It's going to take those fatty acids and get them into the cell, more specifically into the mitochondria of the cell, to be used and burned as energy. If you don't have adequate amounts of carnitine, you don't burn fat effectively and you don't optimize your fuel intake, so to say. And this can contribute to things like that, I just can't get going feeling. Well, you can't get going because you can't put your fats to use. You need to optimize the intake of the fats. And something that, as I'm sharing this with you, that just came to mind is that this is also something that for those that have leaned very heavily into a keto diet where you've got a lot of fat intake, you may be overwhelming your carnitine pathways, especially if you're getting on a keto diet, you feel better, and then you see that I don't feel as mentally optimized now as when I started keto. This can be because of L-carnitine. This was something that I witnessed looking at lab tests over and over for folks on keto diets, is that there started to be a consistent pattern that I was observing that they would have low carnitine. It's easy to fix. Make sure you're getting enough red meats in. Again, carnitine, carni, Latin there. There's a connection in terms of the language. Carnitine is telling you where it comes from. It comes from meat. But also, if you need to use it supplementally in the short term just to get those levels back up, do it. The other thing about this is that your body is also going to make acetyl L-carnitine from the carnitine, and that's going to lead to the production of acetylcholine, which is supporting brain speed. Acetylcholine is also optimizing your memory, your focus. There's a neuroprotective effect, meaning that it protects these neurological structures. And interestingly, also, acetylcholine helps take you into more of a parasympathetic, more of a relaxed, what we would call the rest and digest phase. That's where acetylcholine can also make it easier for you to shift over there. So low carnitine can look like a depressive fatigue, right? Individuals with depression tend to have more fatigue. This is part of the reason why that is, or can be part of the reason why that is. And once you look at how all of these nutrients start to work together, the carnitine becomes the stabilizer in this picture because it allows for that constant funneling of the fats into the cells to be burned for energy, and it puts those fats to work more efficiently. Let's talk specifically about some of the fats that we're looking to optimize with when it comes to using red meat to offset depression. Specifically, we look at CLA, also known as conjugated linoleic acid, as well as our omega-3s. These can be the fatty acids that your brain uses. You can think about these as calm your brain fatty acids, if you will. And from a sourcing standpoint, your grass-finished meats, your grass-finished red meat, beef, these are going to naturally contain higher amounts of conjugated linoleic acid and omega-3s. And by the way, guys, if you're in the Texas and Louisiana area and you're listening to this and you're looking for, well, where can I get the most optimized sources of these red meats? Harvest Hills Ranch is where you need to be looking at. Now, these fats are going to lower inflammation directly. And inflammation, especially if you think about it, reframe that as neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation is one of the primary drivers of depression. So anything that we can do to offset that, we need to be taking a step towards that. These are going to help keep the mood steady. They're going to be brain protective. And if you've been a person who's cut red meat out of your diet, or even just meat in general here, but especially if you've cut red meat out of your diet, you've probably allowed the inclusion of some fats to come into your diet that we could just put under the umbrella of questionable fats. You've taken out these more optimal polyunsaturated fats like the omega-3s, the conjugated linoleic acid. You've taken out some cell stabilizing saturated fats. You really need those. These are the type of fats that we want to lean into and not have these questionable fats coming in. And if you're cutting out the foods that your body needs, you always have to follow up and ask, well, what did I allow in my diet that, or what am I not getting enough of? That's the thing you got to think through on this. So when you look at all of these nutrients together, there's a pretty clear pattern that starts to emerge here. And that pattern is that these nutrients, they're not isolated, they're not random, and frankly, they're not optional either. They're part of a system, and they all integrate and they work together. Here's the big picture. When you remove red meat, you're not removing a risky food, what often is termed a risky food. What you're doing is you're removing an entire system of nutrients that your brain depends on. The B12, the heme iron, the zinc, the creatine, the carnitine, the conjugated linoleic acid, the omega-3s. These nutrients don't act in isolation. They work together. Synergy is the word for the day in this conversation. It's a coordinated network of interactions that are important for your brain to stay stable, if you want it to stay energized, if you just want your mental function to be resilient, you want to rebound back you want to optimize and rebound back with your mental health as fast as possible. If that sounds like where you're trying to go, well, real grass-finished red meat, it was never a problem for you. It was actually the solution that you've been missing here. So lean into it more aggressively for all the reasons that we've talked about today. And for many individuals, when you start incorporating more red meat back into your diet, you're going to see that this was really the foundation to optimize your mood and offset depression that you've been missing. Depression is too often simplified into a single cause or mechanism. Depression isn't a single pathway issue. It's an entire systems issue. And when you understand that your brain runs on a network of nutrients that all interconnect, they all interface and work together, there's a much clearer picture that starts to emerge here. And it's that real red meat starts to restore what modern diets have slowly been taking away over time that has led to the onset of more depression across our population. Now, if this information and this video has opened your eyes to a new way of thinking through this, don't forget to give this video a like and make sure you share it with someone else who's been avoiding red meat because they've been fearful of it and not because they don't understand how it benefits their physiology. Help them understand that simple fact. Now, if you haven't watched part 1 of this video yet, that's where I delve into the neuroinflammation, the neurotransmitter production, and your blood sugar and how protein benefits that. That's the video on the screen right now. Give it a look.